the right-wing Supreme Court judge, Amy Coney Barrett, or Amy COVID Barrett, as some other folks on the left call her, is drawing the ire of MAGA for her recent decision to side against Donald Trump in the case of freezing the foreign aid. I've seen online conservatives mad at her and liberals romanticizing her, which is fucking horrible because she is still she's someone with horrific beliefs. But MAGA is mad at her because she went against their big beautiful leader Donald Trump. This is, and now this is going to sound weird, but, and I'm not using this to praise her. This is what you are supposed to do if you are a principled person. I may not agree with your principles, but I can at least respect when you stand on business. That is what Amy Coney Barrett did in this instance. She ruled in favor of the Constitution. Every so often, I'll see a tweet from Rand Paul that I agree with. He, as much as I don't agree with him, he is a principled libertarian, and I can respect him on that because he at least believes in something. A lot of these Republicans in Congress don't believe in anything, and they will only go where Donald Trump goes because they are afraid of him and they are afraid of MAGA turning on him. And that is a disgrace because they were elected by their constituents and they are in office to do what's best for their constituents. We're going to watch this video courtesy of MSNBC.
Significant Supreme Court ruling this week. Republicans are now taking aim at Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee, after she joined the court's liberal justices to reject the Trump administration's freeze on foreign aid. The 5-4 decision allows USAID to restart nearly $2 billion in payments. Joining us now, NBC's Lawrence Hurley and Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. Lawrence, just first set the scene for us here. Why is Trump world turning on Justice Amy Coney Barrett? I'll be honest, when I was covering her confirmation battle, I couldn't have fathomed that we would end up here.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to remember is that they're not turning on her for voting to overturn Roe v. Wade. They're not turning on her for expanding gun rights, for ending affirmative action in college admissions, and all these other rulings where she's been a staunch conservative vote on the court. What they're turning on her for, as this USAID ruling showed, is that she's not fully aligned with the Trump agenda 100% of the time. So for some loud voices online who have a lot of followers, 100% is all that's needed, not 95%, and that's kind of where we are right now.
They are very loud voices. But
I do want to interject here. This also applies to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney voted with Donald Trump, voted in line with Donald Trump like 97% of the time or something. And she came out and said that, hey, January 6th, not cool. The vibes were tarnished. And they fucking flipped on her despite the fact that she was virtually Donald Trump. I mean, guys, for the love of God, her dad was fucking Dick Cheney. Like, this is MAGA. Is just, it's a cult, man. It's a cult. It doesn't exist in any, it no longer exists in a political setting. In 2016, MAGA did have some, like, anti-establishment, they did have some anti-establishment, views, beliefs. There was some plausible deniability when it came to voting for Donald Trump. At this point, all of that is gone. They exist simply to serve Donald Trump. And as I mentioned, if at any point a representative, a governor, even a senator doesn't vote in line with Donald Trump, they flip on them regardless of what the issue is.
Here of what this ruling even was, because it was $2 billion in payments to USAID, but for contractors who had already done the work.
Right. The district court here issued a temporary order saying that essentially the president can't seize money that Congress had already directed him to spend for work that was already done. And all the Supreme Court did here is ask the district court, hey, clarify that order. They didn't disturb this temporary order. That's not to say they couldn't later. They just left it in place for the time being. And that's not such an extraordinary, act to do. And I think it really signals that at least Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts, they're not all that pleased with the President of the United States talking about defying federal court orders. And this may signal at least some solidarity with a lower court in saying that the government can't just ignore lower court orders, that they need to follow those. The one thing I will also say is that when you look at some of the criticism online.
Okay, before we get too deep or too removed from the actual substance of the decision, this went down to a lower court, and the lower court ruled in favor of Donald Trump. It's not just that they are it's not about being in line with or defying the lower courts. It's about upholding the Constitution. This is getting lost in the discussion. I think all of these elected representatives, and the folks in the Supreme Court are unelected, but everybody who works for the federal government in whatever degree, even if you're like doing data analysis for the CFPB, you are beholden to the Constitution, and you are to uphold the values of the Constitution. The Supreme Court is the Supreme Court has the final word on the constitutionality of anything and everything. It is about Congress appropriating funds. It is about Congress having the power of the purse. Once a spending bill passes through Congress and is signed by the president cannot undo that. The president cannot veto that. They have powers before it's signed into law, and they can do budget amendments and different proposals, whatever. But once that is signed and allocated, that's it. It's done. It's written in the Constitution. You have to wait for the next budget to pass, and then you move around whatever the fuck you want. To rule against this decision, to be in what's the appropriate legal definition, to be in the minority on this decision is to be against the Constitution. It's that simple. It is also worth noting that there could be a touch of misogyny going on here, because if we remember, the Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority. John Roberts also voted in favor of this decision, and he has not been getting as much criticism as Amy Coney Barrett.
Lower court orders, that they need to follow those. The one thing I will also say is that when you look at some of the criticism online, it is ugly, and it is all about the fact that she is weak, she is timid, she's bitter, she's a DEI hire. These are very gendered criticisms of Justice Barrett.
All right, yeah.
And
I did not watch this video beforehand.
That she, as Laura said, she hasn't really done anything to undermine her conservative credentials here. Those seem wildly inappropriate and out of line.
Yeah, this isn't even overtly political either. This is just about budget funds. It's important to note that Amy Coney Barrett, of the 3 conservative justices appointed to the Supreme Court, well, I don't want to say of the 3 because I don't remember John Roberts, but Brett Kavanaugh and her, when they went before Congress and were pressed on Roe v. Wade being a super precedent or not, Amy Coney Barrett did not believe that. She did not believe that Roe v. Wade was a super precedent, whereas Brett Kavanaugh did. She was at least principled in that regard. Now, obviously, she voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, but she was not shying from her conservative Christian background. She thinks that obviously life begins at conception and that abortion is the scourge of the earth. So she was at least principled in that regard. But it's not about principles. It's about vibes, and it's about the aesthetic. And if MAGA sees you going against Donald Trump, they will flip on you.
Well, I'm glad that you bring this up because I want to drill a little deeper here. Bring back up the graphic on the screen of the way that this vote actually broke down, and you'll see that Justice Coney Barrett is on the same side of this equation as the Chief Justice John Roberts, and yet she is the one being called a DEI hire, evil, a closet Democrat. Those are direct quotes. So what do you think is behind that? I mean, is this just the latent misogyny that all of us have covered within Trump world right now, the undercurrent of it that is just so palpable online? Christy?
I agree completely with that. The one other thing I would say is they also, I think the difference between Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts is that Trump appointed Justice Barrett or nominated her. And so I think given that, they expect that essentially she was going to be bought and paid for. And that's just not how it works. She's showing that she's independent. She's showing that she is willing to evaluate each case on its own and not necessarily always vote for Trump's interests. And that's what anybody would expect of a good justice. The fact that this is a problem for conservatives online really speaks more to their issues than those of Justice Barrett.
Yeah, the whole idea of the Supreme Court, the whole construction of the Supreme Court was to be an unbiased third party. They are supposed to be independent arbiters of the law. They are supposed to see legislation and interpret it not on political lines, which they have been doing increasingly more of over the last couple of years, but from the lens of the Constitution and what the founding fathers, quote unquote, have intended. The founding father thing, I think, is a little bit, I think that if you are going to be a Supreme Court justice, fuck the founding fathers and just go exclusively with the Constitution, because the founding fathers were not necessarily the best people. Obviously, they did a lot of good things, but they equally, they had slaves. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. George Washington, although he allowed his slaves to be free after he died, still owned slaves. You're supposed to go off of the Constitution because that is the foundational text that the government was built on. But we've seen increasingly more and more conservatives thinking that the Constitution is just fucking bullshit. It further highlights the unwillingness of them to have an ideology, because they may think the Constitution is fucked up, but whenever someone tries to do gun reform, they're like, oh, see, it says it right here. It says Second Amendment. It says that I have to own this AR-15 with the red dot and all these fucking hollow points. It's just, and again, it is worth noting that this case got struck down at the Supreme Court, but then got approved or ruled in favor of in a lower court.